Alright, so begins another draft physics video presentation. Comments on commenting, whatnot. So anyway, Superior Mind poses the question, curious if a group of stars is moving towards us, contracting and expanding. The time light takes to reach us is obviously different for each star, and so they are never where they are in the images as we known. So closer stars are a bit more accurate, and further out they go around the edges, the further away they seem, thus the longer light took to reach us, meaning we're seeing stars at positions from long before one another. I'm curious about what we understand about the stretching that this causes in the images, as if I have not yet seen any detailed analysis of these artifacts with respect to galaxy images. Yes, I've seen no detailed analysis of any of the optics for gravitational lensing. Not any, but it's trivial at best in terms of they draw you a simple diagram. Oh, there's a lens, and in the gravity, they just make it some kind of lens, and they just say the light does this, and there we're done. That's it. That's all we got to say. And so I think the nature of Superior Mind's comment is that, especially a galaxy that would be viewed in this direction, the pancake is this way. This could be 100 light years across, and obviously the light from these stars is going to be way delayed, way behind the light from these stars. And so when we're going to view, we don't have to view it through a lens in this case, but the lens argument is also creates poses. So these two views are going to be very different, and one would assume that this thing has moved some. It has more chance to move than the stuff here in terms of the amount of distance it can move as we're viewing it. So we're viewing this stuff much with more delay than the stuff in the front, and therefore positions will be inaccurate, and that should be visible. I guess I would argue that most of the views we have of galaxies that are interesting are not views. They're views when we are looking at horizontally, so the distances would be much more similar, and that in fact when you do look at galaxies on their edge, they do look fairly ugly. I mean, the distinction of the stars does get sloppier, and so there might be some of that effect being demonstrated. I guess the argument would be any motion this way equals motion this way, and so the amount of distortion balances out in some respect. But again, I would argue that the more important lensing argument is the simple 3 that I've already brought up that'll never be addressed by anybody apparently. The problem of the lens being the wrong shape is huge. So the idea is you have a galaxy here that's close and one that's far away. Now, they're the same size in the real universe, and so you could argue that this one is creating parallel beams of light. But they also argue that these are often magnified images. So if the light was parallel and you created another image of the galaxy in here, you kind of have to understand that it's really not parallel light, because these things are absolutely actually very similar to the same size. So the light didn't really go parallel. It went to a negative focus. That is, it shrunk one of the galaxies in terms of your view of it. And that's one of the realities here. Now, obviously, you can see that that if it's going to do that, that there's going to be a great deal of difference in the light coming from over here and the light coming from over here in terms of its distance, and the amount of time it has to travel to get to the location is hugely different. And then even the little bits or rays of light that are going to be very close to each other, they're going to travel different distances, and that ruins the phase of the photons. They won't be in phase anymore. And that problem is fixed by the traditional magnifying lens, by the fact that the light that goes through the middle is slowed down a lot, and the light that goes through the edge is slowed down a little. And so their phase is restored by the fact that there's a change in the amount of time the energy takes to get through the lens. Now, with a gravity lens, there is no glass. There's no medium to make any of those compensations. So there's nothing to restore any continuity in the phase. But anyways, the real point is that this image formed here is now going to, the idea is to send it to a focus here on Earth. That is, to have them converge. So you have created an image in this field of gravity somewhere around an object. And the obvious, I think it's quite obvious, argument is the light that you need to bend the most is out here, and the light you need to bend the least is in here. And gravity will do exactly the opposite. It'll bend this one more, and it'll bend this one less. And so it can't possibly come to a focus where you can take all of these different locations, which could be light years across. This distance can be light years of distance, and light years of change in gravity at the r squared rule. So at the r squared rule, the gravity is getting weaker and weaker as you go out. And some people argue, well, this distance is longer, so it's in the gravity for a longer time. I think the lame-ass Piro made that argument. But the point is the gravity is getting weaker in both dimensions. It's getting weaker this way and this way. And being longer in the gravity in one dimension isn't going to save you from the weakening going in the other direction. So it doesn't matter. That can't fix the problem. That can't make you be more affected by gravity because you were in it longer. It doesn't solve the problem. It still gives you at minimum, it still gives you an R problem, in the sense that it'll always be less gravity, even if you're in it longer, further away. And the amount there, so the easy answer is the amount they're in the gravity longer, two beams next to each other, this one's in it a little less time than this one. The fact is that the gravity is twice as much weaker here than it is here. And so you're not going to fix it by being in it. That little bit of extra length isn't going to compensate for the fact that the gravity here is much stronger. So it's going to make this one look like it was in it longer because it's in a much stronger gravity. The simple argument is you can't have the silly notion that I can put myself in more gravity by moving further away. That doesn't make any sense. And that's what you people are defending, as a notion. And it's just a notion. It's junk. It doesn't. So anyway, you won't see any of this analysis of exactly how these photons do this radiation, these freaking, again, these waves of light, whatever that means, that we know land at a location with specific original energy. They don't wave here and the wave gets weaker and weaker and weaker in any other way, then there's less of it, less clumps of the wave. So I mean, it's it really can't be viewed as anything other than a wave of clumps of bullets, to be rationally understood. And again, they have no theory of light refraction. They have nothing as a theory. And again, pointing out that Newton said there was half as much gravity by momentum, and momentum's the argument. This velocity. Velocity decides how much gravity is going to affect you. Velocity has to do with how long you're in the gravity, and yes, and how long you're in the gravity does matter. And so by this, the rational rules of velocity is the thing that decides how, velocity decides where the Earth is. If you took the Earth out of the system and the moon was left, the moon would have the same orbit as the Earth. because it has the velocity. The velocity is all that matters, not anything else. I mean, if you killed the orbital function of the moon would still orbit in exactly the same orbit as the Earth. It has nothing to do with the size of the Earth. It has to do with the velocity of the Earth. Velocity decides how much gravity affects you because it's affecting your material bits, proportional to your mass. So you only absorb as much energy as you have mass to absorb it, and therefore the force affects you only by how much net you're creating, how much you're capturing. And the less energy you capture and the less mass you have will create the same answer for both the Earth and the moon, have the same answer for how much they're going to be bent by gravity. And so photons have a rule, if the rule is consistent. So all the material objects, they obey Newton's laws, and the only one that doesn't is now Einstein's special case. Okay, so Einstein created a special case where photons bend 2x. They bend twice as much as everything else. Their velocity equation is that it's as if they're going half as slow as they're really going. It's as if the photon somehow has some new speed, okay, just for making Einstein's theory correct. And for no other purpose. There's no other piece of evidence that indicates photons are twice as affected by gravity. That somehow they only have to go half the speed and stay in exactly the same orbit. So if I put a photon in the Earth's orbit, it would create and made it go as slow as the Earth. It wouldn't stay in orbit. I have to make it go half as slow as the Earth to make it stay in the orbit, because of this 2x rule. And they say that this is proven physics, that they've established that this is the truth, and there's no reason to believe it. There's no good reason to believe it. This special case for no other reason than to make Einstein right about some silly equivalence principle that he shouldn't have messed with in the first place. That, pretending, that a spaceship moving, the walls of a spaceship moving are the same as gravity pushing you on the Earth. When, no, they're not the same thing. All right. Moving on. DraftScience, you need to understand that Ken is practicing in the lost art of reductive reasoning. Oh, this is satire. Yeah, I don't got time for that. Yes, Ken's a douche. Alright. Stupid freaking cord. Alright, so this comment was just so stupid. What more evidence do you want? Yeah, I've told you I want explanations. I want answers to my questions, which you never answer. So, but again, he's saying that we have this, what more evidence do you want? Like they somehow provided a whole huge pile of evidence, like they have done what Darwin did and go through the whole thing of explaining all the different organisms and why they fit into these patterns and why there's no other logical conclusion. You haven't done that at all. You haven't even come close to that. You're citing experiments you can't repeat, which is the number one crime in science, right? Is to, the Sabine Hassenpfeffer person just did a video talking to some psychologist where they apparently found, when they tested all these papers being published in the subject of psychology anyway, with all these, statistical analysis and all this other stuff, that they found out when somebody went to the trouble to actually try to duplicate the experiment, they couldn't duplicate the results 30% of the time. I mean, that's pretty dismal. 30% of the time they can't duplicate the results. I want you to provide evidence that matches your confidence and explain to me why a reasonable person should have to believe this. You are making an extraordinary claim, and you're providing unordinary evidence, less than ordinary evidence. That's the assertion I'm making. Now, your counter argument is shut up. You're not making a counter argument. Okay, so what more evidence do you want? A cartoon showing light bending in real time. That's what you have now. That's all you have is cartoons. They take blenders and swirl stuff in them to image black holes. They don't take, and you don't have any real evidence of it. They don't show us the center of the galaxy, right? They're supposed to have images of the sun's whipping around the black object. How come nothing in that field has any light distortion? How come nothing is bent? No light is bent. You have this huge gravity that's making a star whip around, and yet there's nothing demonstrating that any light is bent. Can you answer the question? Why is that? So again, I don't watch your cartoons. That's all you have is cartoons. All you have is cartoon and fake light experiments you never did, like the detector experiments always cited in the two-slit analogy, where you pretend you did these detector experiments when you never even tried them. I mean, you're the one full of the fake evidence. Extrapolation and abstraction are essential to science. Well, what does that even mean? Just make it up? No, I'm perfectly comfortable with you having a theory. My simple argument to you is you can't sit there and assert my theory's the truth when you can't provide evidence showing it to be the truth. I mean, shit. I'm just saying, show me the evidence, okay? You're saying light's bent by gravity, right? So you have this one way, the heavy sun. You can do some experiments, but it is difficult because the sun isn't very massive, right? I mean, it's not very dense. And there's a hell of a lot of noise around it, so that's not good either. So it's not the ideal thing to do the experiment with, but I would imagine something like Saturn, who's producing so little, it's just reflected light, essentially, that you can go right on the surface of Saturn and do some of these, Venus, not Venus, Saturn, what's the one, Saturn has the rings, the one before that. Anyway, that, Jupiter. It has substantial, 5 times as much gravity as the Earth, I think, on the surface, something like that. So you got some hope. I mean, the sun is 8 times on its surface, but see, you can't get anywhere near the surface, so the sun's not an ideal candidate, but at least you can get near the surface of Jupiter. So why don't you show this light bending around Jupiter? Anyway. We can't just see the light bending because light is what causes visual images in the first place. So you think that's a sensible statement. You're asserting all this stuff with such arrogance, and you say something that's fucking stupid. We obviously see the light when it impacts us, and what we're saying is that the impact is in the wrong location. I mean, you don't even know the very basics of this whole refraction and deflection argument, right? I mean, the whole idea of gravitational lensing is that the object's here, we're over here, and the idea is we're going to see light that was going this way, and instead of seeing it there, we're going to see it here. So we're going to see the object there because of the way the light has been distorting us. So we're going to see the fake image. The real thing is here. We're going to see a fake image because the light took this turn, okay? And so we're going to project that the object is in a location it really isn't in. But we're going to see the photons. The photons have to hit us for us to see. That's how we see something, is we see where they end up and where they're coming from when they end up there. We can tell directionality. Pathetic. We only see cross-sectional snapshots of the path light takes. That's true for every single thing we see in a location, so that doesn't mean anything. The point is we see an illusion, a fake image in the wrong location. It's made out of the real photons, but the real photons were changed in their direction, and we see an image in a location that it isn't there. So that science is pretty solid, shithead. Anyway, hits the retina. So we have to abstract out the path using known relative positions of bodies in space. Again, you're not arguing the argument. The argument is you haven't done the experiment. That's the argument, right? The Eddington experiment is not images of anything, okay? Because they're time lapses, they're blurs across the screen, they're little blobs. This is one sun. It's one location on the film, right? And this is another star going over here. All right, and this is another star over here. And what they have to do is figure out, well, what's the center of this, both in terms of its thickness and its width. All right, and they have to get the center of this one. And exactly the timing has to be exactly right, right? You have to have exact time codes. And this is back in the 1919. you know, when they're doing it with a stopwatch at best. You know, their timing isn't going to be nearly what it could have been today with today's technical. Fuck you. Stupid fucking. Excuse my bad language. Working on it. But that's the experiment, okay? They're time-lapse blurs of a sun that went from here to here to here to here to here over a period of time, and it makes a little splosh on the film. And that's what you're comparing. So you're comparing getting this data correct in the sense of then you have to turn this thing into one solid location. And then you have to compare the two images of these comparisons between these three stars 6 months later when they're at about the same locations. You know, you have to look at exactly in the same place, get these three locations again, do the same thing, get these locations all timed correctly, and then compare these two images. But that's all you're doing. You're just taking two images and comparing them. That's all the Eddington experiment required. Nothing abstract or strange. You're just going to compare this image to this image and see if one of these images is, you know, here instead of here. A star can't magically jump from one point to another. Well, they actually do that in the sense that if you could follow them in real time, that's exactly what they would appear to do, is sort of jump. The star would actually disappear for a period of time and then reappear if lensing is correct. So you don't know anything about the subject, do you? So if its apparent position suddenly changes, it has to be because its light doesn't always travel in a straight line. And again, there's no evidence of it. We're talking about whether you have any evidence of the fact of it happening. The whole argument is you don't have any evidence that that's what's happening out there. We see a star in our direct line of sight with the sun completely out of the way. You don't see any of that. That's my whole argument. Where's your picture of that? Show me the fucking picture of that. Show me that. Eddington wasn't even hoping to do that. You can't do that, essentially. But you can't get outside the sun's corona. Okay, you can't get behind the sun and then view it from outside the sun's corona and pretend you can bend around that way. You have no hope of doing that. Eddington wasn't saying the sun was behind, the star was going to pop out from the side of the sun. Eddington was just saying I can take a picture of this sun and these distances won't be the right distance between each other. Let's see. When the sun comes between us and a star, we expect not to see the star, yet we see it in a new location. So again, where do you have a shred of evidence of that? So you're just making the assertion that you have pictures of it, you have evidence of it, that somewhere that was demonstrated to take place, and you have zero evidence of that. Zero. And the only thing you have evidence of, again, getting back to these jackasses who keep bringing up radar and radio experiments, the only thing you have evidence of is that, yes, there is around all the hot objects, all right, there is a ton of energy all around them, all right. As we know, with the Earth's own atmosphere full of particles, just like around the sun, there's an atmosphere, okay. So this is the sun it's got real mass here. And so what they're seeing is they can have a radio source, okay, that goes behind the sun, all right, and they'll still hear it, okay, in the sense that they'll still get some signal from it. Well, that's because this is going to deflect in all of these directions. The radio signal will scatter in every single direction. It'll scatter anywhere you want it to be. So you could move over here and you'll see it through scatter alone. You move over here and we could even move the Earth even further away and still get some of it, some signal from it. But it gets weaker and weaker as you go further out that way and further out that way. The signal gets weaker. So, and none of that is eliminated from any of their jargon. If they say, oh yeah, we've compensated for scatter, there's no way to compensate it when all you're measuring is the phase, okay, and saying, can I detect the phase of the light? So when that's all you're looking for, it's going to be going in all of these directions, and there's no way for them to say, we're not listening to just scatter. We're listening to scatter, but scatter creates the shortest distance between the two objects, and it also creates the longest distance. It creates all of the different paths. That's what scatter does. It diffuses the light across a huge area, so you can get it, you can hear it still. But that's all they have. That's not evidence that gravity took a photon and bent it. That's not evidence of a function of gravity. That's evidence of a function of the Earth's atmosphere, scatter. You can do the same thing on planet Earth. You can see the light from the sun, even when the sun goes down beyond the edge of the horizon. What do you think you're seeing? Are you seeing photons being bent by gravity? Or are you seeing photons being scattered by the atmosphere? I mean, you people are just so dishonest. All right. The only explanation, okay, when the sun comes between us and, okay, new location. The only logical explanation, right? So he has no images of this, no proof of this, nothing. And he says the only explanation we have a simulation of it, and the only explanation for the simulation is it must be true because we simulated it. You know, we put stuff in a blender and it swirled around and everything got distorted, so that must be the truth. What other rational conclusion is there? It must be black holes because look, if I swirl stuff in a blender, it looks just like what I expect a black hole to look like. That's great evidence. What more evidence do I need? Oh, you're just amazingly pathetic. Is that light from the traveling star at the angle to the Earth is bent towards the Earth, giving the appearance of it not being behind the sun. So this is amazingly stupid. First, they have no evidence of that, and second, the Eddington experiment had nothing to do with seeing something behind the sun. So you can't get any with the rudimentary facts correct, can you? And yet you're so arrogant. Your scattering theory makes no sense. Yeah, well, you won't demonstrate that. If it's scattered light and not bent light, we would only see a certain wavelength. Bullshit. You'd see every single one, just like what a prism does to light. You'd see all the wavelengths, and not the full light signature of the star in question. Well, of course you would, because you could prismatically spread the light if you want to, but the point is the photons that are coming in, there's no what's the word I'm looking for? You see all the light. When the sun sinks below the horizon, you don't see just red light. Now you see red will reflect off clouds and all of that kind of stuff because the longer distance traveled through the atmosphere. But the sky looks light. Okay, it doesn't look necessarily all red. And if I took all the clouds away, you don't see any of that, right? You just see the atmosphere. So that's horseshit. Similarly, the sky is blue and not identical to sunlight. Well, who said anything about it being identical? So that doesn't even... Similarly, the sky is blue and not identical to sunlight. I don't even know how that relates to his argument that somehow scatter isn't causing the effect in radio telescopes. Anyway, scattered light goes in all directions, so only a small fraction would reach us. Exactly. And it's exactly the results they have with these radio experiments, is they get an incredibly weak signal. But that's the whole point of having a big giant antenna, is to detect very weak signals. Duh. Scattered light goes in, all right, only reaches, leaving the signal extremely weak. Yes, exactly, and that's exactly what the evidence demonstrates. Nowhere near as strong as the signal of the original star. Exactly, and that's exactly the result. So you go show me where that's not exactly what the results are with those experiments, that they aren't detecting extremely weak signals. Okay, even Newton's law of gravitation predicts bending of light. No, it doesn't. Nowhere in any of Newton's mechanics is there any prediction of the speed of light beyond the fact that Newton did in fact know that they had surmised because of the shadows on the moons of Jupiter or something, the speed of light, and Newton knew it was 7 minutes to get to the sun. So he knew that. Okay, even though it's 8, but he was pretty close. So his approximation was pretty close. And so Newton's theory used the speed he had, which was a little less than the actual speed of light. So Newton had a speed. He approximated how fast, because it's just a velocity equation. Remember, the force is proportional to the mass. So it's always the same force proportional to mass. And all that matters, the only thing that matters for figuring out how much you're going to be bent going into an orbit is your velocity. Velocity is the only thing that decides what your orbital path will be. Velocity is everything. Mass is nothing. So just a lesser extent than Einstein predicts. Well, obviously Newton's math is the same for all material objects. Electrons, protons, elephants. It doesn't matter what you throw into a gravitational field, because Newton knows it doesn't matter whether it's an elephant or a chicken. The same thing's going to happen, and it's all going to be about velocity. So if I throw an elephant in and I throw a chicken in at the same velocity, they will follow exactly the same path. It's all about velocity. So again, Newton's number matches the number for every other material object thrown into a gravitational field. Einstein's number is the one that breaks that rule, says no, photons are entirely different than the rest of the material universe, and we're going to double, okay, the amount of effect you can have on a photon. So the chicken and the elephant do the same thing, the chicken and the electron do the same thing, the chicken and the piece of bubble gum do the same thing. But no, I put a photon and obey the same rules. All of a sudden, the photon goes in a completely different path. So it's the only thing that does this. It's the only piece of matter in the universe that has this special rule. And it doesn't apply to magnetism. It doesn't apply to the electric field. So the magnetic and the electric field somehow aren't affected, even though the photon is. Those two fields aren't. You can't bend a magnetic field with gravity. You're such an asshole. Sorry, you're just such an asshole. All right, so let's see. What a superior mind said. Let's see. Light can pass through stars' atmosphere in a straight line. It's bound to hit some electrons. By what mechanism is it proposed that the bent nothing is bending light? Well, he won't answer that question. By what method is it proposed that the gravity field, the gravity force, the gravity geodesic sees photons differently than it sees electrons? How is gravity making a distinction between, oh, that's an electron coming, I'll bend it less. Oh, that's a photon, I'll bend it more. How's it doing that? First of all, they take this into account. Okay, when they account for wavelength-dependent deflection, they say, oh, well, yeah, we're compensating for a scatter. They have no way to compensate for it, except by doing some sort of Einstein trick, just pretending, we're just pretending that the signal came from over here and it really didn't come from over here. They have no possible way to do that. Why don't you explain to me how they can compensate for it? All they're getting is the signal. They're hearing something. How do you, like if I hear something around the corner, okay, because it deflected off of somebody else's house, how do I compensate for that? There's no way to compensate for it. You'd have to be in alignment with the actual source. That is, you'd have to be able to see the source from one antenna and not see it from another antenna for it to be possible, even for you to say that you have some capacity to know what phase it should be in, or how the fluctuations in the signal or something. You need some standard by which you can compare your signal to know whether it was scatter or not scatter. So that's just bullshit. You're making a claim you're not going to be able to demonstrate with any evidence. They find that the remaining amount matches Einstein's deflection curve. It's obviously it matches in the sense that you got the signal when you weren't supposed to be hearing anything, you're hearing something. So to say the remaining, isn't that convenient? You've just decided that a certain percentage of the signal is scatter, okay, and we're just going to save this little bit that's left over, and that was gravity. So it was scatter. See, they're basically conceding that no, No, we're saying the signal did go through the corona, okay, and it did bend. But we decided that 80% of the signal was scatter and 20% was really gravity in the corona. See, it's gravity inside the corona that did it. Okay, so I don't even know how to make an analogy to that, but you can see how fake that analysis is. They're just basically saying, we're going to just pretend that part of that scatter, I could do it with the atmosphere, right? So the sun sets, and I could just argue, yeah, 80% of that light you're seeing, oh yeah, that's deflections, reflections off little particles in the atmosphere, that's scatter. But 10% is gravity bending the light around the curvature of the Earth. Yeah. I mean, I can say that. How could I prove it? Oh, that's right, I can't. All right. They find the remaining amount matches Einstein's deflection. Well, of course, like I said, the fact that it matches is no surprise. You have no rational account for this other than to say this is some coincidence. No, my argument to you is you have no way of establishing a path of reasoning that allows you to say, oh yeah, we know that there's really secret gravity in there, and so some of the scatter is really gravity. Go ahead and show me the analysis that demonstrates you have some way to do that. Because you don't. Alright, goddamn, I hate YouTube keeps removing comments. Yes, so what? Yeah, it's always been a problem. I mean, as I demonstrate, I went to Ken Wheeler's video and his own comment to a commenter was gone. And then somebody else noticed it's back. So, God damn, I hate YouTube. Anyway, second of all, they look at the deflection of all the objects, not just the ones whose rays pass through the corona. So again, here we go. There's only one signal. You either hear it or you don't hear it. So that's just bullshit. Why don't you continue to imply they only look at these near the corona? Well, I'm going to tell you they can't make a distinction. Okay, I mean, again, radio telescopes aren't photons. Light photons. They're nowhere even close to it, right? I mean, huge wavelengths versus photons almost infinitesimally small compared to the wavelengths they're using. So the resolution is pitiful for a radio telescope. So, you're implying you have some great image. You really don't. All right. We need to examine the data math myself. I need to. If I look on the internet, there's lots of conflicting information and a lot of credible people who say they actually have great doubts about how certain they can be about the estimated atmospheric compositions and reflection estimates. Yes, again, they're like I said, they can create any error they want, because they can just say, no, well, there's gravity in there. Some gravity did it. Yeah, they're just saying it. They're not proving it or demonstrating it. Really, how can they actually figure this out with any certainty? They can't, and that's the whole argument. There's no theory to this differentiation that they can tell what signal was bent by gravity and what signal was bent by refraction. They have no way to do that. There's no theory. All right. So I'm killing this thread only because yeah, fuck you. Yeah, that's the reason. No, I'll leave it up. But, this is just such a bullshit argument because you can't even get your facts right. You don't even know that there is no experiment where we see something behind something else. Those are the galactic images, and I've already pointed out how those images are preposterous mathematically. They make no sense at all. The images aren't symmetrical, which doesn't make any sense. And as Einstein stated, you're never going to see an Einstein ring for this very reason. I mean, Einstein knew that you people don't know your physics. I mean, don't know the basic rule. I mean, at least Einstein was smart enough, I guess, to figure out that a gravity lens is the wrong shape. And so Einstein knew that your only hope to lens with an object, okay, is that you could possibly, these distances would be equal, and that it is possible that one ray of light could take the right path to us. One single little ray. But as soon as the object had any thickness, you could never resolve an object. You could never see a sun or a round galaxy or any shape, because the bending of the light is going to be less out here and it's going to be more in here. So the only thing you could possibly get is one lucky ray of photons, and that's it. One single lucky ray. And the ray right next to it, it gets bent too much. The ray right next to it on the other side gets bent too little. It can't be brought to a focus. So Einstein at least understood that a gravity lens isn't a fucking magnifying lens. Not even close. But you don't care, right? I mean, you have Einstein, the freaking man who invented your bullshit, telling you it's not possible. You don't care. So, I mean, you take Einstein seriously when he says, well, photons are special, they get bent twice as much. It's just the way it is. Well, I need it to be. It's just the way I need it to be for my theory to make any sense and for you to be able to see prove me right. The only way you can prove me right is photons have to be bent twice as much. Because if we go with Newton's number, the Eddington experiment is not possible. We have no hope because the deflection is too small. We have no hope of seeing it. So Einstein had to make it twice as much. Like I say, he didn't do it for this purpose. He did it for the purpose of making falling in gravity. Okay, he had to make photons going across the plane of the Earth. He had to make them deflect as much as photons deflect in a spaceship going 1G. So he had to make those two things equal, which was stupid because the photons in the spaceship never deflected. They didn't move. Anyway, I just hate you people. Hate you. Okay, Modern Mystic is back. Okay, so the rest of the comments are comments I deleted because, yeah, these people can't manage to be anywhere near civil. And if you can't make your argument, if you can't just make your evidenced argument, cite your sources, stay on the subject, screw you. I'm not going to accept your lies. So as soon as you lie about what I've said or what I've presented, you're done. Your comment's not staying up, because I'm not going to waste my time defending myself in the first place as a routine, and I'm just going to use people as examples, okay? I mean, the only comments I'm not going to accept are ones that have lies in them. Sorry. If you can't prove one of your accusations, fuck you. All right. I hate YouTube. It keeps removing comments. He has in place... I have to move this over. He has filters in place. No, I don't. So you're lying. All right. There's only two words I have filtered. Okay, the N word and the F word, so to speak. That auto remove stuff. So that's a lie. You made an assertion. You can't back up with evidence, and I know it personally to be a lie. So fuck you. It can be disabled, but he chooses not to. It's another lie. I have checked the box that says allow all comments. Fuck you, you're a liar. I guess. Yeah, well, you're not here to be making accusations, okay? So again, pedophile. Until you prove you're not a pedophile, you're a fucking pedophile, and you can't post on my board because you're a pedophile. Okay, he might even actually add words. So again, this is just such a waste of time. I have no obligation to accept comments from people this fucking rude. Alright, for instance, it took 15 minutes just to post my other comment. Again, it's not my fault, and tough shit. I don't know why you people whine so much. I don't have a problem posting comments. What I have a problem with is people deleting them, and that's what takes place. Okay, lots to talk about terrible experiments and evidence from a man who has no experiments and no evidence. So again, just overtly inaccurate. I have done experiments. I have proven things with experiments. And I cite experiments all the time, and those are the evidence. The evidence is meeting the real experiments. I'm the one with the real evidence. You're the ones with the fake evidence. I'm the one here with the evidence that multi-slit diffraction gradients create images at the different locations, and that images can't be made by randomizing math. Randomizing math won't get you images. I'm the one who's pointed out that obviously, invisible photons, the experiment looks completely different than with electrons. Electrons obey the gradual on and off math, photons don't. Fact. Okay, a fact you'll ignore. I'm the one who points out they say they did detector experiments. There's no evidence in any annals anywhere on this planet that they've done any of these detector experiments. So it's a fucking lie. That's the evidence. The evidence is you're perpetuating liars, okay, and fake evidence. They say Stern-Gerlach is an electron experiment. They're showing the spin of an electron when there's silver atoms going through the experiment. Now, how exactly are you seeing the spin of the electron when you're sending silver atoms through the experiment? They imply that electrons go this way and electrons go that way. Well, why don't they prove that with electrons then? I mean, you're so full of shit, you lying scum. Anyway, all right, so there's plenty of argument in the videos and plenty of questions asked that you never answer. And that's a glaring truth. And why is it the only experiment you don't like are the ones that contradict your theory? So again, another lie. I pointed out clearly that the experiment that Einstein got the Nobel Prize for, right, the photoelectric effect, is a flawed conclusion in my opinion, because the only thing their instrument that detects photons can detect is clumps. So they're saying light comes in clumps. Well, yeah, that's because your detector only detects clumps. So of course it's going to look like clumps if all you have is a clump detector. You didn't prove that light comes in clumps really when you're using a clump detector to detect the light. So that's just, missing the obvious that if you have to wait for an electron to be moved by a photon, doesn't mean the photon doesn't exist. It really means that you have an electron movement detector. Not the same thing. So obviously it's a clump in the sense you have to move the electron, but it doesn't mean the force is a clump. All right. Every experiment that is in line with it is all good, apparently. No scrutiny needed. So again, just a preposterous lie. There's lots of experiments where I've pointed out how they should pick at this. They should do this in more and better ways so we can glean some more information about exactly what's taking place. So where have I said anything other than that? And what experiments are you basically saying I'm saying are the most greatest experiments ever performed in the history of mankind? Which ones are the ones you're saying I'm relying on so heavily, or with any, where's your demonstration that I'm saying, here, they say so here, so it must be? I'm not saying I'm going all the way back to the Bohr model. I'm saying I don't have any interest one way or the other, except that I think the key fact that's obvious is that they chose to create electric atoms rather than magnetic atoms. And if they chose differently, then the structure would have been different and it would have worked. But the ones that don't, they are always just crap. So again, this is about don't. When I was criticizing the two-slit experiment, I wasn't criticizing it because I'm saying the pattern demonstrates something that's to my advantage or to my disadvantage. I was just arguing that it's an experiment here to be manipulated, and why don't we manipulate it to find out what a photon is? So that's a lie. I mean, most of my theory wasn't developed until after I started presenting the theory. I started with just an argument about gravity. All of the rest of it came later, idiot. And I was making the same arguments back then about the bad evidence you have for your theory. I mean, what my counter argument is only one half of the equation. Having some counter theory that works much better than your silly theory, that's only half the argument. The first half of the argument is always valid. And the first half is that you have incredibly weak evidence and you have made incredibly strong conclusions based on that incredibly weak evidence. That's the fact, and you have so little integrity you won't even admit that you won't even say something like, I wish our evidence was better. I wish we had better evidence. I wish we had what Darwin had, which is lots of examples and lots of ways to point out how this must be the truth, that the earth is an old place, that it's changing, there's seashells on the mountains and all this other kind of crap. You wish you had that kind of evidence, but you don't, and you won't admit it. Just a coincidence, I guess. So again, you didn't prove any of that. You didn't prove that I rely heavily on one assertion made by the same person I'll insult as being incredible the next minute. There's no evidence of any of that. I'm not the one quote mining the evidence. You are. That looks just like water waves. Well, except in the single slit experiment, it looks nothing like water waves, and except in the multi-slit experiment, it looks nothing like water waves. Yeah. You're the one quote mining. It must be nice to just throw out whatever real world results you don't like. So again, it's just more nonsense. I made very specific arguments about what experiments I think are crap and what assertions that are based on those, like entanglement. Again, you think the Allen aspect experiment was brilliant. You think they know enough about polarized light first, right? That's what it was using, polarized light. You think they understand how polarized light works enough to draw these hard conclusions about what their expectations should be doing different experiments. And you think they can make this beam splitter thing that creates two equal beams of light. You think they've done that. They've mastered it. And I've pointed out how theoretically you don't stand a chance. You can't even theoretically defend a half-silvered mirror as creating two equal beams of light. It's impossible theoretically. You people are just so pathetic. Actual physicists don't have that luxury, however. No, they have the luxury of being in their little ivory protected fort, and they never have to defend a damn thing they do. And that's the whole problem. They publish obscure, bizarre crap that nobody bothers to even examine. They just say, "Oh, how the hell do I fucking do this?" So you just take what they say and say, yes, they're right. So you think LIGO makes sense. You think that and they blame it on Einstein, right? When Einstein said about gravity waves, the same thing he said about Einstein rings. You'll never see one. Okay, it ain't possible, because the wave is going to be made out of a tiny change in gravity, a tiny change in the center of the object's gravity when it's moving, when the two things are swirling around each other this way and when they're swirling around each other this way. Tiny change in the center of gravity. And you think they actually can see half the distance of a photon when they bounce and they can use as a device. The ruler to see half the distance of a proton is a device that sends a photon 1,600 times between two mirrors. And those mirrors, they already know, even the best mirror they can make, it can be variable how deep each photon goes into the mirror. It could go in, it could hit right on the surface, atom number 1, or it could hit atom number 15. 15 atoms deep. So you're going to use a ruler that every time it hits the mirror, it has a change in distance of potentially 15 atoms, and yet you're going to tell me you're going to use that device to measure half the distance of a proton. Fuck you. Anyway. They have to work with the things that nature shows. So this is just more bullshit. No, they work with simulations, mathematical models, and rarely do they work with anything called real evidence. Shows us, even if they aren't immediately intuitive, are evolved chimp brains. So again, this isn't about intuition. It's about reasoning, and it's about the evidence and the fact that you are claiming, you're making a bold assertion, an extraordinary claim, and you have not even ordinary evidence. Again, Allen Aspect's experiment isn't even ordinary evidence. It's insanely complicated and relies on you believing that he can actually shoot a photon over here and catch the exact same photon over here. Yeah, sure he can. All right. What more evidence do you want? We already did that one. I do want more evidence. Okay, so that's all that one. We already did that. Your scattering theory makes no sense. Yes, it does. So anyway. All right. Remember, anybody can come up with a theory that ignores experimental evidence. So again, this is an assertion I don't accept. There's no experimental evidence I have ignored. Show me it. Post me the links to your brilliant, extraordinary experimental evidence. And again, your evidence has to be in some form that can be analyzed. I mean, pointing me to LIGO and saying, there's proof there's gravitational waves. You haven't proven to me that there's any theoretical reason to believe that matter can be turned into bent space. It wasn't Einstein's theory. So where did that even come from? This idea that you converted 3 solar masses into bent space, a magical force of some kind. Not radiation like photons or heat or something like that. No, bent space. Where's your evidence that that can even happen? And then where's your evidence that LIGO was ever tested? That somebody actually decided to test the instrument and see how sensitive it was with some other controlled experiment. Where's some other controlled experiment where they did a LIGO experiment to detect how sensitive the instrument is? Where are those examples? And then you want me to believe that you've heard every sound in the universe already and you have them all in your records, and so you know when you're being fooled because you've heard everything the universe can do. I mean, the whole thing is crap. All right, your philosophy cult will applaud your dismissals, but everyone else will dismiss you instead. Well, again, that'll be to your detriment because I'm the one doing the honest and real science, and you're the people doing this fake propaganda science where you just keep lying and you never answer any of the questions. Why didn't Einstein think Einstein rings would be visible? Why don't you explain how Einstein was wrong? Explain to me why Einstein didn't understand. Okay? Show me why he was stupid to think Einstein rings wouldn't be visible. Why was he wrong? Can you explain it? Shit. The telescopes you actually do image quasars. Again, we're not talking about imaging a quasar. We're talking about seeing bent light. All right. And the particle behind it is not that complicated. The principle behind it is not that complicated. I didn't say the principle behind radio telegraphy or whatever you want to call it is complicated. What I said is when you start turning them into interferometers, that is, you start using 2 telescopes in 2 different locations and feeding the information in, and they have to be timed exactly correct because obviously you got to have the same phase, blah, 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 blah. That does get complicated shit for brain. Your whining has no bearing on the veracity of the evidence. So again, they just keep saying we have rock solid evidence. There's no way to dispute it. We've proven it. And the evidence is lame and it sucks. And it's no better than the Shroud of Turin people or something. There, we have the Shroud of Turin. Doesn't that prove that Jesus was 11 feet tall and walked the earth? Well, how are you doing anything different? How is your evidence any better than that? Okay, you fucking religious kooks. And you have no explanation why the so-called scatter follows the deflection curve so accurately. Oh, yes, I do. Because it follows every curve accurately. You can find whatever you want in the scatter. You can find the shortest path. You can find the longest path. You can find either one. The scatter provides them all. All right, so that's it. All right. This is just such these are useless interactions again. So why can't any of you people, you can't find one single person with a physics degree to answer my questions? Not one single one. And all you can do is imply that I have cheated the evidence somewhere, that I made a cheat video somewhere, that somehow I'm not paying attention to your great evidence. And it's a lie. Okay, because I do go to the websites and I read this crap, and then I argue to you. And look, this one guy, Abdul, he hasn't even paid enough attention to know that Eddington wasn't seeing his son behind the sun. He doesn't even know that fact, let alone does he probably anywhere near aware of the fact that Eddington's slides were ruined, that he only got 5 out of what he was hoping for, like 25 or 60 images, and that the quality of them was 10% of his best expectations. 10%. Do you know any of those facts? Assholes. All right. So, I mean, he said in his own journal, I wouldn't stake my life on these results. That's what he said in his journal. Now, he didn't say that to the New York Times, but that's what he wrote in his own journal. Okay, so anyway, till next time. And such.